It really is now make or break. Talks resume between EU and British negotiators in Brussels, trying to find a compromise on the final sticking points of a post-Brexit trade deal. Reports are that the two sides seem to be making headway over fishing rights, but disagreements remain over competition rules and the future policing of a deal. The UK's chief negotiator, Lord Frost, is in Brussels for further discussions with his EU counterpart, Michel Barnier. Well, let's get the latest from both sides of this. We're going to be heading to London very shortly in a second, but let's start in Brussels with our correspondent, Shona Murray. Shona, as talks start again today, lay out the EU's negotiating side. What are they really critically caring about this morning?
Well, it's the same issues they've been carrying about for the past several months, Rosie. But I can tell you that in the last few minutes, Michel Barnier, the EU's lead negotiator, has just briefed member states' ambassadors. And just having spoken to a couple of people in the last few moments, the overall assessment is very downbeat. People might recall late last night that there was some reports in particular British press that there was a breakthrough on fisheries, which would obviously lead the way to a breakthrough on the other issues. But in actual fact, the UK side here I've spoken to since last night and again this morning, and as well Michel Barnier said this in the meeting, there has been no breakthrough on fish. So unfortunately those reports are incorrect. They are at least discussing certain possible maybe solutions when it comes to access to UK waters and solutions around quotas, but there isn't a sign of a breakthrough yet. In addition, the other issue, as we know, level playing field and the issue of subsidies, the EU wants to ensure that if subsidies are given by the UK government to businesses or to industry, that there's a UK independent regulator that decides where that subsidy should go, how it should be spent, and that there's also some sort of governance issues so that if businesses across the single market are concerned about extra subsidies, that they can go to that independent regulator. And that's a bit of an issue because the UK sees this as a breach of sovereignty. So last night, Micheál Martin, the Irish Prime Minister, Irish Taoiseach, said that the chances of a deal are 50-50, and I don't think much has moved since then.
Right, Shona, hold right there. Let's go to London to speak to our correspondent, Tig Enright. Tig, Shona sort of laid out the EU's position. Where is the UK this morning? Is there any space left for compromise?
Hi, good morning, Rosie. Well, listen, the fact that they're still talking shows that the UK does still think a deal can be done. However, likely that is, of course, is another thing. We were hearing there details of the mixed messaging that there has been on the core issue of fishing rights. Certainly the UK Agriculture Minister George Eustice was speaking on television here yesterday, and he suggested that there had been that breakthrough, although we've had a lot of mixed messaging on that over the past few days. But, you know, on that other key issue, the so-called level playing field, it has to be said, for Brexiteers, the idea of the UK having to follow EU rules in a post-Brexit, post-EU membership world is particularly politically toxic. It undermines that renewed sense or perception of sovereignty that they were hoping to get out of Brexit, and it could be, if there were to be ground given by the UK on that, a tricky one to sell. But remember that Boris Johnson is a salesman, and this is the man who famously repackaged Theresa May's politically toxic Northern Irish backstop, repackaged it as a victory and sold it to his party, got it over the line. That said, his political capital, his popularity is weaker now than it was back then, but never underestimate the real desire that there is here to borrow Boris Johnson's election slogan from last year to simply get Brexit done.
Shona, talk us through the agenda then today, because meetings will start again. What's on the table?
Well, that's right. Meetings are ongoing. And then we'll have a phone call conversation with Boris Johnson and Ursula von der Leyen, where it's hoped that, you know, again, that there may be some sort of political breakthrough. Because another thing that you hear here in Brussels, and I've been hearing it for weeks now, and similarly again on Saturday night after that phone call with Boris Johnson and Ursula von der Leyen, that the situation is almost completely political and not really technical. You know, I know we're discussing things around state aid and fisheries, but as we've heard, a deal is there to be done. These things are not insurmountable, but they are political. And I think in relation to what Tig was saying there, they're political because the Brexiteers will see things like the state aid issue as a breach of sovereignty and Brexit in name only. The EU's position is not that it wants the UK to follow EU rules all the time, but that there are common standards where in the area like the environment, where standards will always have to be raised, that the UK has the same level of standards and therefore the same investment in those standards. Otherwise, it could undercut the rest of the single market if it does things at a much cheaper and lower standard level. And that's what it's about. The EU says it's not about telling the UK what to do. It's about ensuring that it protects the level playing field in the single market. I think, just to finish up, Rosie, I've heard that really this could go on for the next couple of days and reach the level of the European Council, where EU leaders are meeting here in Brussels on Thursday. They hope not, but I think that may be where we're headed.
And the question is, how much time is left? Well, let's go back to Tig. If there isn't a deal, what are the immediate consequences, really? Because, the end of December is only a few days away now.
Yeah, that's right. But of course, don't forget that there are also consequences to a deal. And, businesses that trade across the border, the trucking industry, the managers of ports, and of course, the customs teams here are already, racing to prepare for the introduction of a deal, because a deal does actually bring with it border checks, which haven't been there since the dawn of the single market. And it is widely assumed that these are, with the best of will, they cannot run smoothly from the get-go, and there could be delays and disruptions to, industrial supply chains and potentially fresh food shortages too. But without a deal, well, that becomes even more complicated, because then you start to have to impose tariffs, cross-border taxes on goods crossing the border, and they could be anything from 10 to 90% depending on what the item is. Clearly, that will cost businesses and ultimately cost consumers too. Brexit, even with a deal, is already forecast to cut 2% from UK economic growth for the next year. Tariffs will make that significantly worse. But it's always been, of course, part of the UK's rhetoric that it's willing to walk away without a deal if, a good deal, a bad deal is better than or no deal is better than a bad deal at all. We've heard that rhetoric escalated just over the weekend. Boris Johnson's Downing Street briefing that Boris Johnson's cabinet will stand behind him if he does decide to walk away. We've heard that from the EU side as well, but of course the consequences are much more stark here, because the UK is far more reliant on the EU for trade than the EU is reliant on us here.
Tig, thank you very much. Our correspondent in London, and also Shona Murray speaking to us there from Brussels. Of course, we're following this closely throughout the day and in the next few days as well. Well, let's get more. Let's speak to Matt Bevington, who's a public policy and foreign affairs analyst for the UK in a Changing Europe think tank. Thank you for joining me. Look, it's complicated, isn't it? We've just had both sides explain their point of view as negotiations start again today. The balance of all of that, how likely do you think it is they're going to be able to come to a compromise?
Well, from the outside, it's obviously very difficult to tell. I think this week does appear to be the key week, and especially the next few days, given the European Councils later in the week. I mean, I think one of the important things on the UK side is not just content, although content is very important, but also timing. So the UK is going to bring back some measures to Parliament this week, which will demonstrate to Boris Johnson's Conservative backbenchers that he's really putting pressure on the EU and taking quite a hard line with them. It's important that he's able to do that for domestic reasons. And I think he also probably wants quite a big political moment with other EU leaders, maybe not directly, but at least that it's discussed at the Council, and that's where a final decision gets made. So I think it's about the sequencing of this as much as it is about content, because I think both sides really know what the compromises are and where they need to happen.
And talk us through what you think they are. What are the key sticking points?
Well, I think as your correspondents were saying, it is the level playing field mainly. It seems as though fishing, both sides again understand what the compromises need to be. I suspect, given it's happened on other issues, that part of the solution might be kind of transition periods, keeping things in place for several years and then changing gradually. That seems to be politically the best way to do it, and that's what happened in the first stage as well, with some of the difficult choices to be made on Northern Ireland. They were kicked into technical talks further down the line, so that might be one of the things that they can do. But as I say, there's a political choice to be made, particularly by Boris Johnson, and he'll have to probably do it this week. So I think if those decisions aren't made this week and it pushes into next week, we then risk a kind of slow drift towards no deal. And I think that's really important, because there are two kinds of no deal. There's one that happens several weeks before and gives businesses and citizens plenty of time, well, not plenty of time, but more time to prepare. And there's one that happens at the very last minute, which is the most disruptive scenario, where people and businesses are given just a few days to get ready for the new arrangement. So I think the sequencing is very important here.
Is the UK not sort of already in borrowed time?
I don't think so. I think part of this as well is the fact that Boris Johnson and a lot of the Eurosceptics felt that Theresa May's negotiating tactics weren't very successful and they want to take a different approach. They've got several understandings about how the EU negotiates, and one of those is that things always happen at the last minute, and that partly is true. They need the drama, they need the big political spectacle to demonstrate that they've really pushed this as far as it can go and they've extracted as much as they can. And actually, I think it's important that lots of the Eurosceptics behind Boris Johnson support the way he's doing these negotiations, and the fact that if they reach a success, they also have a degree of buy into the result. So what he'll be trying to do, I think, is lining up the appropriate people on the domestic side so that when the deal is done, they come out in public, they support his deal, and then things can move forward very swiftly. And just, I think, a final point is that the later this is done, the quicker Boris Johnson can push it through Parliament without MPs having too much time to pore over the detail. That's also a really important point, because as we saw with the withdrawal agreement, things were revealed later on that lots of MPs weren't happy with. So he doesn't want this to be in Parliament for too long when he does push it through.
Well, thank you for laying out your analysis, particularly of the Prime Minister's potential strategy going into the next week. Really appreciate it. Matt Bevington, Public Policy and Foreign Affairs Analyst for the UK in a Changing Europe think tank.